Scoundrels, written by Paul Caranci, audio by Max Bowen, and edited by Skylar Batz. It has been said that political corruption is as old as government itself. Yet despite its timeless nature and its devastating impact in society, political corruption remains an elusive term. Listen to each episode of Scoundrels for some amazing stories about greed, corruption, and arrogance that sometimes defines politics in America.
Cirilli later told the grand jury that he had approached a friend, H. James Field Jr., the chairman of Dupree's political organization. Field, a successful businessman, had been a White House aide to President Gerald R. Ford and was a former chairman of the Rhode Island Republican Party. Cirilli testified that he had promised Field a substantial contribution to secure a lease with the state. Field promised to check it out, Cirilli testified, and later Field reported that "we can help you" for a substantial contribution. One day, according to court records, Brusini said that Field pulled him aside after a State House meeting and advised him the Rhode Island Housing and Mortgage Financing Corporation would be moving into the old Providence Journal building. Field told Brusini to collect $25,000 from Mollicone and Cirilli in green, Brusini told investigators. Brusini had lunch with Mollicone and Cirilli at Capricio's, a restaurant in Providence, and was given envelopes containing between $12,000 and $14,000, which he gave to Dupree. At a second meeting a week later, Brusini accepted more cash-laden envelopes and gave those to Dupree as well. In 1993, Field defended his actions, saying he did nothing wrong and would cooperate with investigators. But during one grand jury questioning months later, Field pleaded the fifth, refusing to incriminate himself. Brusini was making Dupree a lot of money, but he was always taken care of in the process. According to court records, a contractor seeking state work landscaped the yard of Brusini's Waterview house in Jamestown at no charge. Another contractor built him a deck. Brusini also became a consultant to Wall Street underwriters seeking lucrative Rhode Island bond work. One paid him $2,000 a month, according to court records. Another paid him $1,500 a month, even though Brusini testified, "I was not an expert in the field." An executive at Bear Stearns, a Wall Street investment underwriter, offered to raise $20,000 to $25,000 for Dupree in exchange for getting a foothold in the state. After getting Dupree's permission, Bear Stearns hired Brusini as a $2,000 per month consultant to keep them apprised of upcoming Rhode Island bond issues. Bear Stearns denied any involvement and wrongdoing. The Brusini and Mollicone relationship flourishes, and, thanks to the governor, so does Brusini's bank account. Brusini and Mollicone became friends and spent a lot of leisure time together. In 1990, Brusini reported an income of $175,000 with a net worth of $1.4 million. Still, he needed to borrow $500,000 from friends and relatives to keep his empire going. Mollicone started to partner with Brusini, and Brusini secured state tenants for two of their buildings. In 1988, Mollicone told Brusini that he was interested in buying the Rosemack building at 160 Pine Street and asked him to check with the governor about getting a state tenant. Brusini became a silent partner, court documents show. According to Mollicone, Brusini wanted his involvement concealed until the lease was signed, sealed, and delivered. When Brusini asked Dupree for a state tenant, Dupree told him it would cost $20,000. Shortly thereafter, the Department of Elderly Affairs moved into the building, and Brusini delivered $10,000 cash to Dupree. He never asked for the balance. Mollicone then asked Brusini to join with him in the purchase of the Metcalf building, an ambitious venture. A grand scheme, according to Brusini. Partners in Pine Street Realty Trust, the owner of the Metcalf building, included Robert Weisberg, a Fleet Bank executive, to help secure financing. attorney Matt Marcello, a partner in Hinckley, Allen, Snyder, and Coleman, to do the legal work, Henry Fasano, a well-connected businessman, successful businessmen Edward Ricci, Joseph Di Battista, and Ronnie Brusini, because he could secure the building's state tenant. Mollicone suggested the Department of Employment Security because he heard they were looking for new space. "I won't stand in your way," Brusini recalled the governor saying, provided the bid was competitive. Brusini said he pointed out to the governor that the Pine Street Realty Partners would be supportive of Dupree's re-election campaign. How supportive? Dupree asked. According to Brusini's testimony, Brusini promised that each partner would contribute between $5,000 and $7,000, well in excess of the $2,000 legal limit. Ultimately, the Pine Street Partners contributed about $30,000 to Dupree, apparently enough because the Department of Employment Security became the new tenant of the Metcalf building. While Brusini enjoyed a lavish lifestyle, collecting cars, joining exclusive clubs, and dining at expensive restaurants, he frequently had to borrow money. Mollicone lent him money to pay his Pine Street partnership expenses and pay his son's Cornell University tuition. Mollicone wondered if he was skimming from the cash that Mollicone was providing to pay Dupree for the state leases, telling the grand jury that he never fully trusted Brusini. After Ronnie Brusini's resignation in 1986 as Dupree's finance chairman, it was more than money that brought him back into the governor's good graces, Brusini told investigators. Brusini testified that in the final years of the Dupree administration, 1989 and 1990, he helped the governor carry on an extramarital affair with one of Dupree's aides, Sandra C. Sullivan. After meeting the assistant Citizens Bank branch manager when Dupree was mayor of Cranston, he hired her for a high-level job at the state housing agency once he became governor. After Dupree gave her resume to the agency director, she became the only candidate to be interviewed for the position. Quiet at first, Sullivan's position became the subject of controversy after Dupree's chief of staff, Robert D. Murray, was indicted for having obtained an improper state mortgage. Sullivan had handled Murray's loan application at Citizens. Murray was ultimately acquitted after Sullivan testified that she had made a mistake on the application. The governor stood by Sullivan in the face of criticism by his political opponents. Her hiring, he said, reflected his desire to encourage employment of more women in state government. In 1988, Sullivan moved to the governor's staff, and the next year, she was promoted to deputy chief of staff with a salary of $57,000 a year. From her office, adjacent to the governor's, she managed his schedule and the politically sensitive task of distributing low-number license plates, a coveted commodity in Rhode Island. Brusini testified that Sullivan also reviewed, with the governor, campaign contributions from state vendors. Sometime after she came to work for the governor, Brusini testified, Sullivan and Dupree, both married, became romantically involved. While Sullivan denied having an affair with Dupree, two others, one a Dupree fundraiser and the other a Sullivan friend, confirmed it, according to the Providence Journal. Their meetings were discreet and often took place at out-of-state hotels. Initially, Roger Messier, a Dupree friend and fundraiser, would make the hotel arrangements, but as the frequency grew, Dupree called Brusini. Among their favorite spots were the Days Inn in Mansfield, Mass., the Boston Harbor Hotel, or the Boston Marriott Long Wharf, both waterfront hotels, or the Providence Marriott. Brusini would drive to the designated hotel ahead of time, he testified, and register in his name. Then, he would pick up the governor and drive him there. Dupree would call Sullivan from the State House or from the car, Brusini told the grand jury, and tell her where to meet him. Usually, Brusini would walk through the lobby with Dupree in case Dupree was recognized. It might seem strange, said Brusini, for the governor to be floating around a hotel by himself. In the spring of 1989, Dupree appointed Brusini to the State Board of Elections, a patronage prize that paid $36,000 a year and carried a 14-year term. Brusini would later tell prosecutors that the job was a reward for his fundraising efforts and for his assistance with Sandra Sullivan.
From students to war story aficionados, Caranci's work captivates all. Prepare to be transported to different eras and perspectives. You're sure to find a story you love and can't put down. Visit www.paulcaranci.com now to discover your next unforgettable read. Don't miss out on these captivating historical narratives. Order your copy today and start your journey through time.
In his grand jury testimony, Brusini described one Saturday that really stood out in his mind. As he was driving the governor back to Cranston from the Mansfield Mass Hotel, he handed the governor an envelope with $10,000 cash, a payment from Mollicone for the Department of Elderly Affairs lease at the Rosemac Building. He then dropped the governor off at the F.A. Dupree Agency in Cranston. A few days later, Brusini testified when he saw Dupree at the State House. The governor recounted what had happened next. Dupree had gone to Walt's Roast Beef next door to the Dupree Agency and bought a sandwich. Then he sat in his car and ate it. Driving home, he couldn't find the envelope and realized he had thrown the $10,000 away. He hurried back to Walt's and rummaged through the trash to find it. He thought it was a pretty funny story, Brusini told the grand jury, and I said, well, easy come, easy go, I guess. The lavish worlds of Dupree and Brusini begin to crumble. Both Brusini and Dupree would see their world crumble at the start of the new decade. Mollicone's embezzlement of $13 million had initiated the banking crisis. The combination of that, plus the ongoing investigation, undermined Brusini's investments, especially his partnership holdings with the now-missing Mollicone. The weak economy and ethical questions involving his administration also hurt Dupree. The Providence Journal had just run a damaging series on political favoritism at the Public Building Authority that began a shakeup of that organization. By 1991, Brusini was divorced, had an enormous debt, and was facing civil suits and a criminal investigation. He was also courting an employee of the Board of Elections, where he held a position on the board. His problems were overwhelming. One day early that year, Brusini's friend, Henry Fasano, found Brusini lying on his bed. He had apparently taken pills and alcohol and needed to be rushed to the hospital. Brusini denies having attempted suicide, but Fasano wasn't convinced. By late 1991, as Dupree began to hear whispers of the state's investigation, he went to see Attorney General O'Neill in his office. The Attorney General asked the former governor how he would feel if Ronnie Brusini were sitting in O'Neill's office the next week. Dupree replied, "I have nothing to worry about from Rod Brusini." Originally wanting to charge Brusini because of his lack of cooperation, by the fall of '93, the prosecutor's sentiment had changed. J. Richard Ratcliffe, who had worked on the case since the beginning, argued that the state needed Brusini's testimony in order to indict Dupree. If the prosecutors charged Brusini, they risked losing him as a witness. Besides, it could take 2 years to bring Brusini to trial, a delay that could jeopardize the Dupree case. James W. Ryan, chief of the criminal division, believed the Dupree case was strong because much of the money in question was easily traceable. The case, he said, was like a mosaic. There was a pattern of corruption dating back to Dupree's days in Cranston. Contractors had admitted making payoffs. They had gotten state work, and the governor had exercised tight control over the selection of state contractors. According to the testimony of Brusini and other witnesses, Brusini, for all his baggage, had been by Dupree's side for years. The cumulative weight of the evidence, Ryan suggested, would be enough to get a jury over the bridge. On February 3, 1994, shortly before Rodney Brusini received immunity and went before the grand jury that would be only the second to indict a former Rhode Island governor, Ryan met with Brusini. He emphasized the importance of telling everything he knew and not doing anything that would destroy his credibility as a witness. In March of 1994, Dupree found himself waiting with his youngest son in a Providence law office for word on whether the grand jury would indict him. A former governor goes on trial, the first since Thomas Wilson Dorr. Edward Dupree laughed when his friend told him he was about to be indicted. Rumors had been circulating in political circles for a long time. Dupree had heard them, but no action was ever taken. This day would be different. As Dupree drove away from his luncheon, he received a call from his attorney. The Attorney General's office had called. The grand jury was voting on his indictment tomorrow. The next morning, March 29, 1994, 18 men and women filed into a grand jury room in the Kent County Courthouse. It took the grand jury less than 4 hours to bring back 24 counts of racketeering, bribery, perjury, and extortion against Dupree and his son Dennis. On April 13, 1994, the two pleaded not guilty at their Superior Court arraignment. Later that day, at State Police Headquarters in Scituate, the Duprees were fingerprinted and photographed in the same dingy room used to process accused drug dealers and murderers. The lines were quickly drawn between the accused and the accuser. Jeffrey Pine, the new Attorney General, said that the indictments and the subsequent trial of a public figure would erase years of public corruption and restore accountability in the system. Dupree's attorney, Richard M. Egbert, for his part, said the government was relying on witnesses that were convicted felons, disgruntled employees, people who have sold their souls. Egbert was an experienced criminal defense lawyer whose client list included Chief Justice Robert A. Bevilacqua, mobsters Frank Salemi, Bobo Marapisi, Bobby DeLuca, Gerard Ouimet, and a host of doctors, lawyers, politicians, and bank presidents. His expertise and success rate warranted a fee of $400 per hour. "I don't care how many guilty go free," said Egbert, "as long as the system is working right. Even the worst bum in the world is entitled to be prosecuted fairly and honestly." Dennis Dupree hired Robert Popeo, another Boston lawyer. The firm he helped build represented corporate giants such as Arthur Andersen, the international accounting firm that will be the subject of its own corporate scandal in the late 1990s, and America Online. Popeo specialized in representing those accused of white-collar crimes. A former federal prosecutor and magistrate, Popeo understood the legal system from all angles, and was considered a brilliant tactician. Even so, after examining the evidence against his client, he didn't like the odds. The case against the Duprees encompassed 20 years of wrongdoing. There were 75 witnesses, hundreds of hours of grand jury tapes, and close to 1 million pages of documents, enough to fill 600 cardboard boxes. Popeo worried that the presumption of innocence would be lost, that the evidence would make it appear that under Governor Dupree, the entire state had been for sale. Popeo's own surveys of potential Rhode Island jurors found a climate poisonous to the Duprees. Popeo and Egbert considered the options: plead not guilty, nolo, or plea bargain. That is, plead guilty in exchange for a lighter sentence. But Dupree maintained his innocence. Popeo explained to Dennis just how bad things looked. "Get real," he'd say. "Look what you're up against." "I'm not your priest," he said. "I'm your lawyer." But there was just no convincing the Duprees. At one point, in December of 1985, with the trial just months away, Dennis started to weaken. He spoke to his father about the possibility of a deal, but the former governor wouldn't hear of it. "Dennis, there's no way I'm going to admit to something I didn't do." The two argued about the issue again at a family function, but Edward Dupree wouldn't budge. The walls were crashing in, and former Governor Dupree was feeling the pressure. The Ethics Commission fined him $30,000 for steering contracts to his political friends. He was fighting the public's perception that he caused the banking crisis. He lost his bid for re-election, was forced to go back to work at his insurance agency, and was feeling the sting of what he perceived as a betrayal by his former loyal friend and fundraiser, Rodney Brusini. He began gambling at Foxwoods Casino in Connecticut. He would listen to Brusini's grand jury tapes and dispute each of his lies. To prove his point, he took a lie detector test and passed, but the result, as is the case in most states, was not admissible in court. By May of 1996, the defense team had already cost the Dupreets $1 million. Egbert and Pompeo disagreed on what the defense should focus on. Pompeo focused on the 600 boxes of paper evidence, while Egbert felt the case could be made by examining the witnesses' greed, lies, hidden motives, and deals. The one thing that they agreed on was that they would be able to exploit flaws in the state's case. Now, all they needed to do was find them. Attorney General Jeffrey B. Pine assembles the state's prosecution team. During his 1992 campaign against James O'Neill for Attorney General, 37-year-old Jeffrey Pine was hard on O'Neill for being soft on crime. Rhode Island's image as a corrupt state would not change, said Pine, until we remove those who are responsible, along with those who haven't done enough, or who haven't done their job. As the race between O'Neill and Pine got close, it also got dirty. Pine attacked O'Neill for a political indictment of Cranston Mayor Michael Trafficante for soliciting campaign contributions from city vendors, a case that grew out of the case against Dupreet. Pine questioned the timing of the indictment being issued just 1 month before an election. Just after the inauguration, prosecutor Richard Ratcliffe sent Pine a confidential 27-page memo detailing the case against the Dupreets. He felt the case against Dennis was stronger than that against his father because of the testimony of Piccoli and Zeno. Most prosecutors within the Attorney General's office, however, felt the high-profile case was too complicated, too overwhelming for an office the size of this one to handle. Several prosecutors said that the Dupreet investigation had gotten out of control, like an underground fire, said one, consuming precious time and resources. Another lawyer called the case a labyrinth of detail, but not a lot of credible people. Indeed, Ratcliffe, in the memo to Attorney General Pine, wrote that the investigators suspected their potential star witness, Rodney Brusini, of having lied about a $52,000 loan from a state contractor. Michael F. Burns is rehired to lead the Dupreet investigation. To lead the case, Pine rehired Michael F. Burns. Burns, a bold young prosecutor who loved taking on the really bad guys, was fired and banished from the Attorney General's office by O'Neill in 1989 after O'Neill questioned Burns's judgment. Burns was quick to support Pine's election campaign, and it now looked as if he might be appointed to head the AG's criminal division. After graduating New England School of Law in 1983, Burns went to work as a prosecutor and rose quickly through the ranks. He developed a command of the rules of evidence, an ability to think on his feet, and a dogged style in breaking down evasive witnesses. Commenting on Burns's tenacity with witnesses, a judge once remarked that only his wife could carry on an argument longer than Burns. Within a few years, Burns was moved into a showcase job in the Attorney General's office, prosecuting organized crime cases. In 1987, at the age of 29, he scored one of his biggest triumphs, a murder conviction of Bobo Maripesi. Relying on confessed criminals as witnesses and going up against the prominent Boston defense lawyer Richard Egbert, Burns persuaded a jury to convict Maripesi of a murder that had taken place 12 years earlier. That same year, Burns also led the Peter Gilbert case, in which a plea bargain was struck that allowed Gilbert to be held in the custody of Providence police for the full term of his 10-year sentence in exchange for his testimony that could have led to the indictments of several mobsters, including New England crime boss Raymond Patriarca. But Gilbert was treated more as a friend of the police than their prisoner. The state spent a total of $160,000 on Gilbert's incarceration. Expenses included the refurbishing of his police station apartment, 8 trips to Florida to see family, liquor, drugs, jewelry, and cars. It all came apart in June 1988, when Gilbert, at age 43, died of a heart attack after a traffic altercation. He was alone, driving to Connecticut to go skydiving with 19 packets of cocaine in his parachute bag. The investigation, conducted by a special mayoral commission, determined that the state had been bamboozled by Gilbert, an artful manipulator skilled in the deception of his fellow man. It appears, the report concluded, that Gilbert received far greater benefits from his bargain than did the state of Rhode Island. In 1989, Burns resigned from the office of the Attorney General, saying he felt that he became the scapegoat for the Gilbert affair. During the time that Burns was in private practice, he was retained to represent a former Dupree aide who was being questioned as part of the Jobs for Sale scheme during the Dupree administration. Investigators spoke to the aide briefly in 1992. It appeared they were more interested in scaring him. In 1993, he was questioned again, but denied any quid pro quo in the jobs that he awarded, despite having solicited some of them for donations to the Dupree campaign. He was never questioned again. Prosecutor Stephen Murray sent a memo to Pine disclosing the potential conflict. He didn't want anything to discredit the case against Dupree. While Richard Ratcliffe had envisioned himself as taking the lead in the Dupree case, Judge Robert D. Krause seemed to dash those hopes when he berated Ratcliffe and the state's case against Laura Donatelli, who had been charged with obtaining money under false pretenses in her dealings with Michael Piccoli. Krause indicated that he felt the state brought the case against Donatelli as a means of getting her cooperation in the Dupree case. Donatelli was acquitted after a 3-day trial, but later pled guilty to a related charge of filing a false document. Dupree co-prosecutor Joseph DeCaperole carries some baggage of his own. Pine asked another member of his team to help out on the Dupree case. Joseph L. DeCaperole Jr., according to Pine, brought a wealth of knowledge to the case. What Pine didn't know is that he also brought to the case a private censure by the Rhode Island Supreme Court for professional misconduct. In 1992, DeCaperole became the prosecutor in Attorney General O'Neill's office. He had hoped to become a judge one day. He was 48 years old and looking to begin life anew. Life had thrown him many curveballs. He worked his way back from 2 bankruptcies, a divorce, hospitalization for major depression, and complaints from clients. Now, just as he was about to help prosecute the Dupree case, he learned that the Supreme Court was scheduling confidential hearings regarding a complaint that DeCaperole had stolen money from a former client. DeCaperole had signed the client's name on a $21,000 check received in settlement of a police brutality lawsuit and kept the money. DeCaperole said he had endorsed the check and kept the money as his legal fee with the client's permission. So, instead of beginning a new, high-profile criminal case, DeCaperole was suspended without pay by O'Neill.
Listen to next week's episode of Scoundrel to find out what happens next. Politics, corruption, and so much more. Follow along. Thanks for listening.
Elite Handyman Services, over 35 years of trusted residential and commercial expertise. Elite Handyman Services is reminding motorists to slow down in residential zones and arrive alive. Never text or drink and drive. Elite Handyman Services, a name backed with over 35 years of experience in residential and commercial work. A full-service handyman. From home improvements, remodels, electrical, construction, plumbing, they do it all. 401-246-4197. That's 401-246-4197, or log into EliteHandymanServicesLLC.net. Professionals who care.